I founded two companies. One is Impact Space and the other is Sutro. Impact Space is currently going through a merger right now. What Impact Space is basically a crunch base for impact. So if you guys are familiar with impact investing or not, I'll actually do a little quick primer on that. But what Sutro is and why this is kind of relevant to this conference is we're developing basically a connected device that you could drop into any sort of waterway, and it'll remotely measure water quality. And so I'll kind of explain a little bit more about how we do that and what we're doing. There is a lot of connectivity issues with Sutro because you are putting this out into waterways. They're stuck. We have a contract with the Mass government. They're out in the Cape. There's remote wells in India, and how do we basically monitor water quality in that sense? And so I'll go a little bit through that. But kind of a quick agenda. What we'll be talking about today is basically 50 billion devices by 2020. What exactly is the next billion? I've kind of zoomed out in this talk to kind of shift the focus from whatever the regular IoT conference is talking about and more about kind of the developing country, the context in the developing country, and kind of the connectivities that we have, because it's a little more of an interesting problem. And if we can really tackle what's going on over there, it kind of makes the problems that we're facing over here a little more easier. Business models for the next billion, IoT, and how that really relates to what the next billion is. The current work that's being done today, and kind of infrastructure and issues that we're seeing in kind of deploying in these spaces. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here for some of you, but Cisco calls this the zettabyte era. And in 2008, the number of things actually surpassed the number of human beings that are actually connected to the internet. And in 2020, they're going to have 50 billion devices that will be connected to the internet, which is going to be obviously much more than the population of this Earth at that point in time. And so what exactly is the next billion, right? So if we're going to zoom out and say, great, we've kind of tackled the U.S. challenge. We understand there's a saturation in the smartwatch market, and how many more coins can we come out with? And Apple iPay just came out. Now Coin obviously has a competitor here. So if you put all that aside and you say the next billion is this, if you look at 7 billion total human beings on this planet, right? The next billion is basically this population of 4 billion people that live on less than $3,000 a year, in a sense. And so if you look at Brazil, China, and India, the three largest countries, Brazil basically earns less than $3.35 a day. India is around $1.56 a day, and China is at $2.11. And this is not to show that these people are in poverty, and that's not why I'm doing this talk. It's basically to show that there is actually an ability for these people to consume product, and they're willing and able to consume product as well. It's just a matter of what kind of business models can you build to actually sell them product. Kind of to that point, as just said, this was by a World Resources Institute report in 2013. And it says the starting point for this argument is not the bottom of the pyramid's poverty, which is what this area is referred to. Instead, it's that the bottom of the pyramid population segments, for the most part, are not integrated into the global market, right? And they are not benefiting from what we're developing here. And so kind of with that focus, right, if you look at what exactly are the characteristics of the bottom of the pyramid, they do not have access to energy, right? They do not have access to water. They lack access to sanitation, but the mobile market is blowing up like crazy over there. And so if you see by 2000 to 2005, there's 1.68 billion subscribers that have grown in this market. And if you look at just the bottom of the pyramid market in general, there's $4 trillion available for actual purchasing power in this 4 billion people that I just mentioned. And so what exactly are the business models in this space, right? What are we looking to tackle? And so from the same World Resources Institute, if you look at this $4 trillion map over here, which is basically what this is, food categorizes kind of the largest portion of it, right? People need to eat in these countries. And if you look at India's cold food distribution chain, there's around 30% wastage of foodstuff. So you can imagine a farmer in rural India that produces milk and gets it down to Bombay for Mukesh Ambani and his $2 billion house that he just created. 30% of that is lost just in that transportation. And so the question is now, how do we use, a good question is, how do we use sensors? How do we use IoT? How do we use, cold food storage technologies to implement in these rural markets so we can actually get food from one place to another more efficiently in an emerging market such as China and India, which China, by the way, has a 7% growth that they're projecting this year. And so, with all that said, just kind of focusing on 4 things, you can look at food, energy, health, and water, which are kind of all interrelated. And so kind of, if you look at growth, like I've been talking about, in emerging markets in general, connectivity is readily increasing. This is by the World Resources Institute and also from Cisco, this graph on top. I don't know if you can quite see it. But look like there's 600 million devices that have come online since the year 2013. And that's only going to increase since 2020, right? The change in online traffic is due primarily to people that are using mobile devices. And this is what we know today here in the US as well, is more people are using mobile devices, but it's even more readily available in these developing countries. And I can give you kind of a quick anecdote. When I lived in India for the last 2 years, I used to work for an angel investing firm out there managing $30 million in assets. I don't know, how many of you guys been to India or China or a developing country? Just a quick show of hands. Great, so there's usually these kind of, there's this worker kind of environment, right? They're the people that are of the lower class, really don't have that high of a disposable income. He was using WhatsApp and Facebook, right? He added me on Facebook. And I saw him sending pictures via Gmail to his pals, right? He was using Gmail to actually send his worker buddies this images of something he took a picture of. And so I questioned him. I said, why are you using Gmail to send pictures to your buddies if you have WhatsApp and Facebook? Because it's obviously, those two platforms are made to share pictures. He said, no, you don't understand, Ravi. The question here is, Google owns Gmail, and Google's a very popular platform, and if you use Google, you're considered cool. And so it's this weird marketing psyche that he had, and he doesn't understand why he's supposed to be using Facebook, WhatsApp, or Gmail, but he's sending pictures through Gmail. And it was this kind of weird thing, and that's going back to kind of the business models of, how do you actually market these products to these people? Just a quick little anecdote. And if you see over here, exponential growth in the emerging markets. If you look at China and India, which is that fourth graph right over there, there's exponential growth in just people that are using because of the obviously increasing middle class, as well as what I'm talking about is this next billion, the 4 billion people. So going back to how exactly can IoT and the next billion, how can we use technology here that we've developed in the US to kind of push it into what's going on in the next billion? And I'll kind of open this up to discussion, which is more what I want to keep this to towards the end. But a few kind of business models that you're seeing out there are D-Lite, Labor Voices, and Nextdrop. I'll explain a little about each one of these in a second. So D-Lite, I don't know, how many of you guys have heard of D-Lite? So Draper Fisher just invested, I think, $5 million in D-Lite. It's an emerging trend now that the larger institutional investment funds are actually investing in these bottom of the pyramid technologies because there are dollars to be seen in these industries. And so if you look at D-Lite, what they're basically creating are small scale solar lanterns that they deploy for under, I think it's $25 or $30. Some of the cheaper ones are around $15. And they're basically solar lanterns that they give to people in the developing world so they can have more light, right? If you give a person more light, there's all of these obviously added economic benefits that my daughter can study and she can go to school and I can work longer hours, X, Y, Z. An interesting thing that D-Lite has done now is they have this thing called a gravity light, which you might have seen on Indiegogo. It's where you could basically put this light up, you put a bunch of rocks on it, and the rocks use gravity to pull down. With that, it charges basically a gyro, and the gyro then powers, or the motor powers the energy for the actual light. With that said, kind of an interesting thing, going even deeper into that, all of us think this is a great thing, we're giving light to the developing country, and people are prospering off of this thing. We did a study with MIT. I'm working with this gentleman, Amit, at the MIT D Lab, which I'll kind of go into a little bit more depth in later. But there was a clear kind of market transposition there. When we interviewed the people that said how much light they were using, they quoted between 5 hours a night. When we actually went out there and deployed these connected sensors that literally monitor how much solar light they're using, it was half of that. And so this goes into a design challenge, right? Is if you don't understand what the heck your market's doing, you're spending more money on batteries, you're spending more money on lights, and sure, maybe they should keep the light open for longer, but they're not. And so there's clearly a kind of market disconnect here. There's not a product market fit in what exactly you're building for these people. Going to Labor Voices. This is actually applicable to the US supply chain, right? Nike has these issues with, I don't know if it's necessarily Nike or not, but there's this Bangladeshi factory that basically burned down due to poor sanitary or insanitary working conditions. Labor Voices, basically what they do is they use connected technologies in the developing country, as simple as a cell phone, or they even have kiosks where workers can go to. And before the Bangladeshi factory falls down, Nike can get on the ground kind of an idea of exactly what's going on with their workers. And so if there's some sort of an unsanitary working condition, or if a floor is about to break down before you or something like that, you can go ahead and text Labor Voices. Labor Voices will push you to that supply chain and basically give Nike or Coca-Cola or Pepsi these kind of analytics on what's actually happening on the ground. Nextdrop, this is actually a really interesting one. A big problem there is that people, because they don't have access to water, these women that have these big things on their head, they have to walk almost 2 hours, 2.5 hours to get to a water source in India. The biggest problem there is the city doesn't turn on water when they should be turning it on. So these ladies walk every day for almost 2 hours, 4 hours round trip, and they come back basically empty-handed. So what Nextdrop does, they put a sensor that's GSM enabled at the tap, and when it starts sensing moisture, what happens is this thing beams the Nextdrop system. Nextdrop uses just text message, SMS, because the people in the villages have these cell phones from what I was talking about earlier. It sends a simple text message of, your daily watering well has water coming in today. It'll be on between the hours of 9 and 1. Go ahead and walk over there and fill up your canister of water. So these type of technologies, right? These people and the villagers are willing to pay for that. So they'll pay upwards of 1 to 5 rupees, sometimes even 10 rupees for having a service like this. And now if you take 4 billion people that are all paying 10 rupees each, you now have a market viable product that people are willing to buy. And so from some of the current work that has been done, I just mentioned the MIT D Lab, SVT Group, and Impact Space, which is the company that I founded. We're doing a sensor-based data mining approach to kind of technologies in the developing country. And I'll talk a little bit more about that kind of after the session's done when we have our little round table in a sense. Data2O is actually the parent company of Sutro, which does water analytics. And so what we're developing is basically a remote water sensing device, like I said earlier, that you could throw into any sort of water, right? So whether you're the Massachusetts state government and you want to monitor Cape Cod water to see if there's enough nutrients in the water, because if you guys have you guys heard of the Toledo problem that they had over there? The city of Toledo, Ohio actually shut down, I think 4 months ago or something, 5 months ago, because there's so many nutrients coming from these farms in kind of the Midwest that ended up polluting the water. And because you have all these nutrients in the water, what ends up happening is the algae blooms start to grow. And when you get a lot of algae blooms, you obviously can't filter that water through their filtering systems and give your water to the city. And this is obviously, with California being in a drought, this is a growing problem of all of our lives of, how are we going to get clean water? Is there desal technology? And, what should we do about this type of thing? Other things that we have where you can deploy these into swimming pools and spas, basically measure your pH, chlorine, alkalinity. It'll, chemistry and math is the same, right? So whoever is using water in what particular type of application can be deployed in those different types of ways. The last one here is breweries, which was really interesting. We were talking to Lagunitas, and when I don't know how many of you guys have brewed beer before, but when you're brewing beer, you have to keep the water at a certain pH in order to get the flavor profile of what you want for breweries. And so if you could deploy one of these in the Lagunitas, chain, they could then remotely actually monitor exactly what the pH is, what the alkalinity is, what the nitrite content is of this water going to the beer. So kind of jumping into what exactly are some of the problems that we're facing with Sutro. This thing around design friction and affordability kind of is what I want to talk about, because here in the US, right, we have our iPhones in our pocket. We're continuously loaded up to 3G, 4G, LTE. And you could use innovative ways of, for example, the Nike Fitbit, or I don't know if the Nike Fitbit does this, but there's a company called Pavlok, which does this, who's part of the accelerator that we're in Boston. And they basically make a negative reinforcement wristband. And so what this thing does is if you have negative behavior in what you're doing, it'll actually give you an electric shock to your hand. And the rationale is if you're shocked enough times, you'll actually lose the, it's Pavlov, right? So you'll use the connectivity that you have to that actual positive stimulus and you create it into a negative stimulus. What they're using is what they call is Bluetooth Low Energy. So they have a Bluetooth Low Energy chip in there. That thing connects to your iPhone. Your iPhone utilizes the LTE to actually get the data off. The Nike Fitbit, I think, has a little USB portal that you plug into your computer, and that's what downloads the data. The interesting problem here is when you start deploying solutions in the developing world and your Nextdrop, how do you develop an innovative solution that basically sits on top of a tap for a water, self-powers itself, but also has enough power to actually utilize the GSM strength to be able to actually reach out to the cell phone? And these are kind of problems that we're facing, day in and day out. And so an interesting technology there is actually 900 megahertz. So if you look at sub-gigahertz technologies, you could, in a sense, what we do sometimes is we'll set up a hub that are on sub-gigahertz, and then we set up these little nodes. You kind of have a hub-spoke network. And with that, with the 900 megahertz, you can basically actually, the devices are allowed to communicate on a lower band, which doesn't take up as much energy. And with that, you can actually use a 900 megahertz to then be your Taylor arm that then communicates either via GSM or CDMA. With the developing country, rugged is a big issue. How do you actually design for the environment that's out there? They have to be cheap. And then kind of the last two things I was talking about was user interface and last mile distribution. going back to the idea of this worker that I was talking to, and he uses Gmail to send pictures. There's a clear disconnect and a value proposition that Google, in a sense, is not communicating to him. And where is Facebook and WhatsApp going wrong, where he's using a different platform to send that? And so, in that, right, how do you develop technologies and user interfaces that people in the developing world can understand properly? Is the other problem. And the last thing is actually last mile distribution. Is how do you actually market next drop to the villages, right? How do you, do I go to this village and talk to every single one of these ladies and say, can you pay me 5 rupees and give me your cell phone number, I'll sign you up? That's not going to work, right? There has to be a more organic way of selling. And if you look at just Coca-Cola in general, they have found a way of basically, in a sense, littering their brand across the developing world so people understand that Coke is this thing I should be drinking. Kind of going a little bit into business and funding strategies. Going back to the user interface, the biggest thing is you have to focus on kind of who your target market is, which is whether it's a developing country or the developed country, you have to understand who exactly your market is, right? Second is you have to localize value creation. Is if these villagers themselves are not understanding what exactly, what is the benefit to me, then they're not going to buy into the solution. And the last is enabling access, right? If they're not able to access this technology, and if it's too expensive for them to get to, then the business model is not viable. Some of the funding sources, I don't know if any of you are interested, but there's this thing around impact investing. If you guys are interested, and I can speak a little bit more about that, and we can go into that in depth when we have this little round circle. The foundations are a really good source for this, and also governments are people that you could potentially partner with in these developing countries. Some things I just kind of want to leave you guys with, and be great if we spoke about that as well, is Google has this Google Flu update that they have in the US, and they can basically track how many people are searching for the search term for flu, and they can go ahead and basically figure out the trends of where flus are coming and going to. The question here, I know Ebola, there's a bunch of media and press here in the US, but how do you actually track how much is going on in Africa, right? There's really no sensors. There's no Google search. These people aren't really searching for, I have Ebola now, I have a high fever, what should I do? There needs to be kind of the stopgap, and there needs to be filters in place so we can actually stop problems like this from happening. Mobile money, right? These people, they hold these currencies, and they earn less than $3,000 a year, like I said. How do we utilize these cryptocurrencies or these protocols such as Bitcoin, or there's M-Pesa out there where you can actually pay using a text message. Again, the cold food supply chain, like I said, 30% of our foodstuffs are actually lost just due to transportation because it's inefficient, right? We have a great system here in the US. How do we bring all this sensor technology, connectivity to the developing world so we can actually make the system more efficient and decrease our resource consumption as well as increase profits on this? So yeah, is there any questions? I'd love to kind of open it up to the floor, and I would love to actually kind of structure this more as a discussion, which is how I wanted to build this. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So the beginning of my presentation kind of spoke about what exactly the next billion is. I have a company called Sutro, which basically designs remote water sensors, and so we are looking at deploying in developing countries. We're looking at deploying in pools and spas here in the U.S. And it was kind of a question around how do we take technologies here in the U.S. and really deploy them in the developing world. Yeah.
And then it's, I guess you're talking a lot about India as the developing country right now. That's what you're doing it in, or what other countries, or are you just focused like on the developed countries, third world countries, or what are you focused on?
So we actually, the water sensor, we actually have a dual model. We're selling to, our first market here in the US is for pools and spas. So we'll actually be marketing to people that have swimming pools. You'll throw this into your pool as a consumer. And what we do is we then take those data analytics, serve you up as a user what's wrong or what's good with your pool. And we actually complete the chain by basically mailing you right-sized chemicals for your swimming pool and spa. But the sensor cluster itself is basically low power and innovative enough to where we can deploy them into the developing country marketplace. And we're working with MIT D Lab to do that right now. Anyway, I'll actually ask you a question. How would you, you're at UI at Yahoo, correct?
Yes.
How would you, I mean, just a quick question out there. I mean, there's not, pretty sure you might not have the even answer to this, but what are you seeing in terms of just differences in UI, in the changes here in the US, and how would you even envision something like that for the developing world? And I mean, I know Yahoo obviously is huge in India, so.
Well, I mean, it's really hard to answer, I mean, because there's a lot of specificity that you have to take into consideration, right? The audience, the context, your technical.
Mhm.
So, and then also, and the context of the platform, right? Whether it's an experience in a kiosk, like you mentioned, or on the phone or desktop. So, I can't answer that like wholesale.
Sure, sure.
I'd have to be presented with something a little bit more definitive as far as like what are the parameters. So, but I think it's for people in the design and UX space. I think it opens up a whole nother door of opportunities
Mhm.
to try to address. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, I came late to
Sure.
join in. So I was just wondering, like, how are you using the water sensors in India, especially to sense the water quality? Is it at the public water goods level, or is it, how are you getting this technology out that?
So, sorry, your question is around distribution of the technology?
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, could I just get your name and kind of what you're interested in? We just did a quick roundabout in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm just interested because there's so many areas, especially when you talk about the developing countries, like
Mhm.
where you need to address, it's more at the grassroots level rather than, because again, as what you mentioned, it's not technology savvy, there are not many devices that can track all these information.
Mhm.
So just trying to understand how is it being applied in the developing countries, and where is it applied? Is it applied at the governance level, or is it at the very grassroots level? And my name is Navita, so I was
Sure.
curious.
So for our technology, with the project that we're doing with the MIT D Lab, is there is a gentleman by the name of Supriyo Das, who is, I think, out of Bangalore or Chennai. I don't forget which city he's from. And so Supriyo has basically invented this product called the Zimba. What the Zimba is it's this thing that goes over a well. The well water usually is pretty dirty, so what happens is it fills up this top canister, which is around 10 liters or so. Using no energy, it actually then, once it reaches the top, just like a toilet would, it flushes a valve. Once the valve opens up, this passage in between the top and the bottom opens up. What that does is, as the flow rate starts to continue down the top, it then gets chlorinated via certain parts per million, because your parts per million has to reach a certain amount to be chlorinated. The issue that Supriyo is having is he has formed this kind of micro-entrepreneur network where people actually buy the chlorine from Supriyo at a certain wholesale dollar amount or rupee amount. They then go and put these things, and they basically loan Zimbas for the village. They then, using this clean Zimba water at their well, then sell it to the community for, because it's clean water, they can then sell it for that. Supriyo's problem is when he sells these chlorine cartridges, the villagers are actually diluting down the chlorine, because they know if they get 1 bottle of chlorine, they empty this out halfway, they can double that by making 2 bottles of chlorine for the same, for the same rupee amount. And so his biggest issue is, I need to make sure that the chlorine that's in well number 2 or 3, whatever that well number is actually chlorinated. And if it's not, I need to go ahead and, because then they're on contract and he's going to do whatever the consequences are for, whatever that is. And so for him, it is to your question, it's more higher level. He'll be sitting, in a sense, in Bangalore. We'll give him a dashboard. On that dashboard, he'll have his 100,000 wells, whatever it is, and we can basically green line or red line that these are the concentrations of these wells. And then the sensors also do other things as well, right? So we can actually start measuring alkalinity. We can measure arsenic. And so not just pH and chlorine. Is there other stuff in my water that I'm not looking at? And so we're not a solution-based technology. We're only on the data side. And then Supriyo can then go and he may implement some sort of arsenic-based solution, or the pH in this, or the water is too hard in this area, so let's go and put water softeners in them or something like that. So, yeah. Yes?
So for your company, did you position it as a for-profit or not? How did you position to get funding and just to scale your own business out?
Sure. So we are a for-profit corporation, and the reason that we chose to go that route is because, one, we believe due to this kind of dual model that we're working with, we are selling, like I said, a product to the pool industry. And so people that have pools obviously have a higher discretionary income, and we can upsell that, that product for them. With that, we can actually create kind of a hybrid model where we are doing social good projects in India, but then again, we are also selling data, right? So we're not necessarily a nonprofit. We're not going out and distributing malaria nets or giving, AIDS medications or anything like that. This is sensors that are for the water that we're then selling to agencies that will then help treat the water. So you could think of the Indian government potentially buying this, or the UN, or for example, MIT Lab, which is Supriyo, who could, in a sense, we could label him as a kind of governmental organization that's supporting clean water efforts. So we are a full-profit institution. And I think that's the whole thing around social enterprise as well, is it's not about just maximizing dollar amounts. It's also about maximizing social equity. And if you can maximize both social equity and dollar amounts, you have now built yourself a viable social enterprise. Because there doesn't need to be this trade-off between, well, I'm going to do good, so I'm going to take less money and starve myself to that. That shouldn't be what social enterprises are.
How easy was that to sell to the venture? Did you get venture funding, or how are you funded?
So we have a bit of seed stage funding from investors, but the impact investing industry at kind of writ large, right, focuses on these type of technologies. And even if you did take away the social impact, are there dollars to be there to be seen? Is the question that they're going to ask. And if there is, then they're still willing to invest in it, right? So you can then even go into the traditional Sequoia Ventures or ETFs or whatever else you may go into to get funding from that source.
Ravi, we're over time.
Okay. All right, I'll be outside if you guys want to chat at all. Thank you.